I'm Grant Hollowell, and I still remember the exact second my wife humiliated me in front of an entire room full of people, smiling while she did it. It happened at my brother's memorial lunch, right in the back room of a steakhouse outside Colorado Springs. The kind of place with dim lights, cheap champagne, and strangers pretending grief is just another social event. I stood up to say a few words, just a simple thank you to everyone who came, and my wife, Lorna, didn't even let me finish. She leaned back in her chair, loud enough for half the room to hear, and said, "Sit down, old man. You're embarrassing yourself. Nobody's here for you." Then my son, Tate, snorted into his drink like I was a punchline, and my daughter-in-law, Brooke, actually laughed. Full laugh. Head tilted back, hand over mouth like she was watching stand-up. I froze there with my glass in my hand, the ice clinking against the rim, my throat locked so tight I could barely breathe. People looked away. That awkward stare at your plate kind of look, like they didn't want to get involved in a family moment that turned rotten, and the visual that burned itself into my brain. Lorna casually reached across the table and flicked the edge of my tie like she was brushing lint off a trash bag. "God," she said, rolling her eyes. "You dress like a walking foreclosure." I sat back down. Slowly. Like my knees didn't work anymore. Like my body was trying to protect what dignity I had left by refusing to move too fast. Because that's the thing about humiliation. It doesn't just sting. It rewires you. Something in me got quiet in that moment. Not sad, not angry, quiet, like a switch snapped into place. And the best part? They didn't know I had just come from an attorney's office, and that I was about to bury them with paperwork so hard they'd be choking on it for years. Let me back up. I spent most of my life doing everything the right way. I worked 35 years as a grid engineer for a power utility, the kind of job where you're always on call and nobody thanks you until the lights go out. I didn't gamble, I didn't cheat, I didn't disappear. I paid bills early. I fixed things. I kept the roof over their heads, even when I was so tired I could taste copper in my mouth from stress. Lorna and I had been married long enough that people assumed we were solid. That's the lie long marriages sell. People see years and think it equals love. It doesn't. Sometimes it just means one person tolerated disrespect longer than they should have. Tate was our only kid. He was in his mid-30s and worked numbers for a living, which is hilarious when you realize he treated my life like a spreadsheet. He and Brooke had 2 kids, and they visited exactly as often as their wallets needed. If there wasn't a reason, there wasn't a visit. My brother was older than me by several years. He lived out in Montana on a ranch, never married, never kids. The kind of man people labeled loner because they couldn't imagine being happy without an audience. In the last decade, we got closer. I'd fly out every summer, just to breathe air that didn't smell like suburban bullshit. Lorna never came. Montana was boring. Too far. No good shopping. She said it like the ranch was a punishment instead of peace. When my brother died, the funeral was small. I went alone. Tate had work. Lorna claimed a migraine. And I didn't push. I didn't fight. I kept swallowing things because that's what I did. I swallowed until I didn't even realize my throat was raw. A few months later, a law office in Billings called and said I needed to come sign documents. I assumed I'd be approving some charity distribution, maybe giving his ranch manager a clean handoff. Instead, I walked into that attorney's office and walked out holding a folder that weighed more than my entire marriage. The estate was 7 figures. Ranch land, 2 rentals, cash, investments, not lottery money, but money that changes the temperature in a room. Money that makes people lean forward. And inside the folder was a letter in my brother's handwriting. He warned me. Not in a sentimental way. Not, "I love you, little brother." He warned me like a man handing you a flashlight before you walk into a cave. He basically said, "Watch them. Don't tell them. Listen to what they say when they think you're not around. Because money doesn't change people. It exposes them." I sat in the rental car outside the office, reading that letter with my hands shaking, and I felt two things at once: grief and a kind of cold gratitude. Because deep down, in the part of me I'd kept gagged for years, I already knew something was wrong at home. I just didn't want to admit what it meant. I didn't want to admit that the people I loved treated me like a resource, not a human. So I went home and lied. I told Lorna the ranch went to the ranch manager and the rest went to charity. I said it casually, like it didn't matter, like I was just the messenger. She didn't even look up from the TV, just nodded and said, "Figures. Your brother was always cheap." Then she asked, "So, nothing for us?" Us. The word was a joke. Over the next week, I watched them like my life depended on it. And it did. Lorna's little comments started landing different when I was actually listening. "Must be nice to retire and sit around useless. Maybe you're getting forgetful. You're slowing down. Don't touch the accounts. You mess things up." It wasn't concern. It was groundwork. She was building a story where I was failing, where she needed control. Then Tate came over for dinner. He acted normal, but I caught the look. That quick flash between mother and son when they think you're too old to notice. After dinner, they slid into the kitchen and lowered their voices, except the walls in that house were thin, and I'd spent my career hearing problems through insulation and drywall. Tate said, "There's no way he left nothing. Dad's hiding it." And Lorna, my wife, said, "Your father's not smart enough to hide anything. He just doesn't understand what he signed." There it was, straight in the chest. Not just disrespect, contempt. Then Tate said, "If he dies first, you'll be fine. But if we wait too long..." They were talking about my death like it was a timing issue, like scheduling a dentist appointment. And then the idea got uglier. Tate said, "We can get him declared incompetent. Power of attorney. It's easy if you say the right things. Confusion. Poor judgment. Start writing down incidents." My spine went cold. My mouth tasted metallic. I stood there in the hallway, hands clenched so hard my nails bit my palm, listening to my own family plan to erase me while I was still breathing. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Because I wasn't going to win with emotion. I was going to win with receipts. I moved fast, quietly, like a man fixing a live wire. One wrong move and you get burned. I met with a divorce attorney in downtown Colorado Springs, the kind of guy who didn't do inspirational speeches, just facts. He told me inherited assets stay separate if I don't mix them. He told me not to tell her anything, not a hint, because once she knows, she'll claim concealment and drag it out. So I opened new accounts at a different bank. I rented a safe deposit box. I copied every document from the estate folder and stored it somewhere Lorna's manicured hands couldn't reach. And yes, I started recording, not for court, necessarily. For me. Because I knew myself. I knew the second Lorna cried and called me baby. Part of me would want to forgive. Part of me would want to pretend it was all a misunderstanding. I needed my own reminders, evidence, a steel bar through the fantasy. I recorded Tate telling Lorna exactly how to sell the dementia story to a doctor. I recorded Lorna saying divorce would be half of nothing, unless she could get me to sign a new will. I recorded Tate saying, "Dad doesn't understand taxes. Just tell him it's for tax purposes." They weren't just greedy. They were predatory. 2 weeks after that memorial lunch humiliation, I picked a Saturday. I picked it on purpose because Tate was coming over. They liked weekends because it made their little meetings feel casual, cozy, like they weren't plotting. Lorna was at the stove making breakfast, spatula in hand, humming to herself like she wasn't poison. I walked in, sat at the table, and said, "I need to tell you something." She didn't turn around at first, just said, "Make it quick." So I did. I told her I lied about the inheritance. I told her the estate was mine. All of it. Land, rentals, cash, investments. And the visual shock hit immediately. Her spatula slipped out of her hand and slapped onto the tile floor. Grease splattered. She didn't even look at the mess. Her eyes went wide, then sharp, then hungry, and she smiled. This fake, sugary smile that made my skin crawl. "Oh, honey," she said, voice suddenly soft. "That's wonderful. Why didn't you tell me?" I reached into my pocket and set a small recorder on the table. Right between us, like a grenade with a play button. "Because I listened," I said. Her face tightened. "Listen to what?" I pressed play. Her own voice filled the kitchen, clear as day. "Your father isn't smart enough to hide anything." Then Tate's voice, cool and clinical. "Power of attorney. Dementia. Started diary." Lorna went pale so fast it was almost funny. Like all the blood evacuated her face to go hide. She took a step toward me and knocked a glass off the counter with her elbow. It shattered. Water splashed across the floor, sparkling in the light like a spill of diamonds. Another visual shock. Another crack in the illusion. And then the front door opened. Tate walked in, saw the recorder, saw his mother's face, and froze. "What's going on?" he demanded. Lorna snapped. "Your father has lost his mind. He's talking about divorce." I looked at Tate and hit play again. This time it was his voice, saying the dementia plan. His mouth actually fell open, like his brain couldn't process hearing himself out loud. "That's out of context," he stammered. I leaned forward, calm as ice. "What context makes it okay to plan stealing your father's life?" Tate's eyes darted to Lorna. "Uncle's estate. He left you everything, didn't he?" "Yes." "How much?" he asked, like he couldn't stop himself. I slid a sealed envelope across the table. Divorce papers. Not dramatic, not a threat, just reality. Printed and ready. "That's not your business anymore," I said. Lorna grabbed the envelope and ripped it open so hard the paper tore. Like aggression could rewrite law. She scanned the first page, and her breathing got fast. "You can't do this," she hissed. "After all these years." I cut her off. "No, you don't get to talk about years like they were love." Then Tate tried to step in, and I watched it happen in real time. The mask slip, the desperation rise. "Dad, come on," he said, voice sharper now. "We're family. We can work this out." Family. Now he said it. Now that money was real. Lorna turned on him instantly. "This is your fault. You put ideas in my head." Tate snapped back. "You've been whining about money for years. You wanted this." And there it was. The truth. In full daylight. Mother and son tearing at each other like two rats trapped in the same bucket, fighting over who gets to bite first. I stood up, stepped around the broken glass, and walked to the door. "I'm not staying here tonight," I said. "My attorney will contact you. Get your own lawyers." Lorna shouted behind me. "You'll regret this!" And Tate yelled, "You're doing this to us over a misunderstanding." I stopped at the doorway and looked back at them. Lorna standing barefoot on tile, with a torn envelope in her hand. Tate with his fists clenched, face red, panic sweating through his arrogance. And I said the only thing that mattered. "You didn't misunderstand me. You misjudged me." Then I walked out. The divorce took months. Lorna fought dirty, tried to claim I hid assets, tried to spin me as confused, unstable, mentally declining. The judge didn't buy it. Paper doesn't care about tears. The inheritance stayed separate. I kept what my brother left me. Lorna got what the law required from marital assets, and no more. Tate stopped talking to me. Brooke was furious at him, because apparently she didn't know how deep his little plan went. Imagine that. A snake embarrassed to be seen shedding skin. A year later, I moved to Montana, not because it was some magical healing montage, because I needed distance from people who measured my life in dollar signs. The ranch was quiet in a way Colorado Springs never was. Open land, clean air, stars that actually looked like stars instead of faint city smudges. I kept the ranch manager on, gave him a raise, let him live on site, because loyalty deserves to eat. And the first morning I woke up there, I stepped onto the porch with coffee in my hand, felt the wind hit my face, and realized something that made me laugh under my breath. I wasn't lucky because I inherited money. I was lucky because I finally saw the truth before they finished burying me. Here's the iconic part. The part I want burned into your brain if you're listening to this, and you recognize the pattern. Love doesn't ask you to disappear, so it can cash you out later. And if someone only respects you when they think you're useful, that's not family. That's a subscription, and I canceled mine. I didn't walk out of that house feeling victorious. That's the lie people like to tell themselves about moments like that. I walked out feeling hollow, like a man who finally admitted the building was already on fire and stopped pretending the smoke was temporary. That night, I checked into a mid-range hotel off the interstate. Beige walls, thin carpet, the kind of place where the ice machine sounds like it's dying. I sat on the edge of the bed fully dressed, shoes still on, staring at my hands like they belonged to someone else. Those hands had built a life, fixed broken outlets at midnight, signed checks, held a baby, paid tuition, shook hands with men who smiled at me and then went home to families that actually respected them. And all I could think was, how long had I been volunteering to be used? People talk about sacrifice like it's noble by default. They don't tell you that sacrifice without boundaries is just slow self-erasure. I sacrificed quietly for decades. That was my specialty. I took overtime so Tate could go to a better school. I delayed retirement so Lorna could feel secure. I didn't argue when she upgraded furniture we didn't need or booked trips I didn't want. I told myself it was harmony. I told myself peace mattered more than being right. But peace bought with silence is just surrender with better branding. The first morning after I left, I woke up before the alarm. My body still thought it had responsibilities waiting to ambush me. I sat on the bed listening to the traffic outside and realized something terrifying. No one needed me that morning. No calls, no requests, no, "Can you handle this?" No, "We're short this month." Just silence. And in that silence, memories started crawling out of the corners. Lorna mocking the way I dressed in front of her friends. Tate rolling his eyes when I tried to give advice. The way decisions were already made before I was informed. The way my opinion became background noise sometime around my early 50s. I remembered the first time Tate called me old man as a joke. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. That's how it starts. Disrespect always wears a smile at first. By noon, my phone buzzed. Lorna. I didn't answer. Then Tate. Then Lorna again. Then a number I didn't recognize. I let it all go to voicemail, because here's the thing they don't tell you about men like me. Once we stop explaining ourselves, it's already too late. I spent that day doing the unglamorous work of cutting cords. I forwarded mail. I changed passwords. I updated beneficiaries. Every click felt like pulling a splinter that had been embedded for years. Painful, but clean. I met my attorney that afternoon. We didn't talk about emotions. We talked about timelines, documentation, and strategy. He told me something I'll never forget. People who try to steal power assume you won't resist. The moment you do, they panic. He was right. By the end of the week, Lorna's tone changed. The messages went from angry to soft to nostalgic. 38 years of marriage suddenly rewritten as we've been through so much. Funny how "we" only shows up when the exit door is closing. Tate tried a different angle. He sent a long text about family loyalty, about how mistakes were made, about how I was overreacting to my own son planning to medically erase me. I didn't respond. Silence is brutal when you're used to control. The divorce process dragged on, exactly like my attorney predicted. Motions, accusations, subtle attempts to paint me as unstable. At one point, Lorna's lawyer actually suggested a cognitive evaluation. That was her last play. And here came the visual shock that made the room shift. We were sitting in a small conference room during mediation. Long table, cheap coffee, everyone pretending civility. Lorna was holding a folder, tapping it nervously like she always did when she thought pressure would make people fold. Her attorney leaned forward and said, "Given Mr. Hollowell's age and recent behavior, we believe an assessment is reasonable." I didn't raise my voice, but I didn't argue. I reached into my briefcase and slid a stack of papers across the table. Clean, organized, tabbed, independent medical records, annual physicals, cognitive screenings from my previous employer, statements from my primary physician. Then I added one more thing, a notarized affidavit from my brother's attorney outlining the estate timeline and the warning letter. Dated before any of this started. The mediator adjusted her glasses and started reading. Lorna's face drained color by color. That tapping stopped. Her attorney cleared his throat. "We weren't aware of these documents." "I'm sure you weren't," I said. Calm, dead calm. "You assumed I'd be confused. That's been the theme." That was the moment the room flipped. You could feel it. Power doesn't announce itself. It shifts. The dementia angle died right there. No appeal, no debate, just dead. From that point on, the case wasn't about what they could take. It was about what they could salvage. Tate never showed up to mediation. Not once. He sent messages instead. Long ones, defensive ones, some angry, some desperate. The last message I ever read from him said, "I didn't think you'd actually walk away." That sentence told me everything. He never thought I was a person with a breaking point. Just a fixture, a resource, something that stayed put. The divorce finalized quietly. No dramatic courtroom showdown, no speeches, just signatures and consequences. Lorna left with what the law allowed. Not what she expected, not what she planned. The house sold. Her lifestyle shrank. I didn't celebrate it. I just observed it. The way you observe gravity doing what gravity does. A few weeks later, I loaded my life into a truck and drove west, mile by mile. The noise fell away. The billboards, the urgency, the constant sense of being evaluated. When I crossed into Montana, the sky looked bigger, like it had room for mistakes and second chances. The ranch wasn't perfect. Fence posts needed repair. The house smelled like dust and old wood. But it was honest. Nothing there pretended to love you. The first night, I sat on the porch alone with a drink and listened to the wind move through the grass. No TV, no commentary, no one telling me what I should be. And for the first time in decades, I slept without bracing for tomorrow. Here's the part people don't expect. Starting over didn't feel brave. It felt overdue. I wasn't chasing happiness, I was reclaiming oxygen. And if you're still listening, here's the truth most men like me learn too late. Sacrifice is only noble when it's chosen, not demanded. The quiet out there didn't heal me overnight. Anyone who says that is selling something. Silence just gives your thoughts room to get loud. And mine had decades of unpaid rent. The first few weeks on the ranch were brutal in small, honest ways. My back hurt in the mornings. My hands blistered faster than I expected. I forgot tools where I left them and had to walk back across acres of land to retrieve them, muttering to myself like an old fool. But here's the difference out there. When something hurt, it was real pain. Not emotional poison disguised as love. Not manipulation wrapped in family language. Just muscles, joints, weather, time, things you can respect because they don't lie to you. I kept the ranch manager on, a quiet man who'd known my brother longer than I ever really had. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer opinions, just showed up every morning and did the work. That kind of loyalty doesn't beg for applause. It just exists. At night, though, that's when the memories came back. I'd sit at the kitchen table, the same one my brother ate at for years, and replay moments from my old life like surveillance footage. Every time Lorna corrected me in public, every time Tate talked over me, every time a decision was already made before I weighed in. It hit me how often I'd been trained to doubt my own instincts, how many times I told myself, it's not that bad, because admitting the truth would have required action. And action costs more than denial. At first, about a month in, I got an email from Tate. No subject line, just text. He said he was confused, that he felt betrayed, that I'd blown everything up instead of talking it out. I stared at the screen for a long time, because the irony was almost impressive. They'd been talking about my death, my mental collapse, my assets, without me. But now that I refused to play along, suddenly I was the one who didn't communicate. I didn't reply, not out of spite, out of clarity. Some conversations don't move forward. They loop, and I was done walking in circles. A few weeks later, I ran into someone at a hardware store in town. She was struggling to reach a box on a high shelf. I grabbed it for her without thinking. We talked. Nothing dramatic. Weather, tools, local nonsense. She laughed easily. Not performative, not strategic, just easy. I didn't think much of it at the time. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't trying to replace a life. I was still unpacking my own spine. But later that evening, sitting alone again, it hit me. She hadn't asked what I did for a living. She hadn't probed my background. She hadn't tested my usefulness. She just talked to me like I existed. That messed with my head more than the betrayal ever did, because it showed me how low my baseline had sunk without me realizing it. Months passed. The seasons shifted. The land changed colors. My routine settled into something steady. Then one afternoon, I drove into town for supplies and saw Lorna's name pop up on my phone. I hadn't blocked her, not because I was open, but because I wanted to see who she was when there was nothing left to extract. I answered. Her voice sounded smaller, tired, less polished. She said she missed how things used to be, said she didn't realize how much she depended on me, said she'd been under a lot of pressure. I listened, didn't interrupt. Then she asked, "Do you ever regret it?" I looked out at the open land stretching past the windshield, the sky so wide it felt like it might swallow regret whole. And I said, "No," not loudly, not angrily. "Just no." She went quiet. Because regret was the one thing she needed me to have. Without it, her narrative collapsed. That call ended politely. Empty. Final. I sat there for a minute after and realized something important. Closure doesn't come from conversations. It comes from alignment. When your actions finally match what your gut's been screaming for years. I didn't win. They lost access. And that's a very different thing. Here's the part most people don't like hearing. If you're surrounded by people who only panic when you stop providing, they were never afraid of losing you. They were afraid of losing what you supplied. That distinction changes everything. I don't hate Lorna. I don't hate Tate. I just stopped lying to myself about who they are, and that freed up more energy than forgiveness ever could. The thing about revenge, real revenge, is that it isn't loud. It doesn't slam doors or flip tables. It waits. It documents. It lets the other side talk themselves into a corner and then turns the lights on. By the time spring rolled around, I had already stopped reacting emotionally. That's when I became dangerous. Because while Lorna and Tate were busy rewriting the story to anyone who would listen, I was quietly making sure the truth had teeth. You see, the divorce ending didn't stop them from trying. It just changed the angle. The first attempt came through a letter. Certified mail. Thick envelope. Legal letterhead. Lorna's attorney claimed there were irregularities in the timing of my inheritance disclosure, and implied I had intentionally deprived her of reasonable marital expectations. That phrase made me laugh out loud. Marital expectations. Like expecting your husband to die on schedule. I didn't respond emotionally. I forwarded the letter to my attorney, along with something they clearly weren't expecting. The recordings, not transcripts, not summaries. The raw audio files, time-stamped, backed up, and legally obtained. My attorney listened to them in silence. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "They're done." I asked what he meant. He said, "They just don't know it yet." Because here's what Lorna and Tate never understood. They weren't just immoral. They were sloppy. In their arrogance, they'd crossed lines that didn't just ruin marriages. They flirted with criminal intent. Planning a false medical diagnosis to seize assets isn't just unethical. It's fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy. And while I had no interest in pressing criminal charges, leverage doesn't require prosecution. It only requires proof. A week later, we had a formal post-divorce mediation hearing. Lorna had pushed for it, convinced there was still money to squeeze. Tate wasn't required to be there, but he showed up anyway. Couldn't help himself. The room was sterile. Fluorescent lights, long table, neutral carpet, that faint smell of burnt coffee and old paper. Lorna walked in dressed like she was auditioning for sympathy. Soft sweater, no jewelry, hair pulled back like she was suddenly modest. Tate followed her, jaw tight, eyes darting. He looked like a man who knew something bad was coming, but didn't know from which direction. The mediator started with pleasantries, legal tone, controlled pace. Lorna's attorney spoke first. He suggested that my withdrawal from the family had caused emotional distress, that my sudden independence had destabilized long-standing expectations. I sat there, hands folded, letting him talk. Then it was my attorney's turn. He didn't argue. He didn't counter. He reached into his briefcase and placed a stack of documents in the center of the table. Clean, labeled, indexed. And then he said, "Before we proceed, we'd like to enter these into the record." The mediator frowned slightly. "What are these?" "Evidence," my attorney said calmly. "Of intent." Lorna shifted in her chair. Tate crossed his arms. The first document was a transcript, not a conversation, a plan. A time-stamped recording of Tate explaining how to get a dementia diagnosis. Step by step. Language coaching. Strategy. The mediator read silently. The room got very still. Then my attorney placed the second item down. A notarized affidavit from my physician, stating I had no cognitive impairment, no confusion, no decline, and that no such concerns had ever been raised by my spouse until after the inheritance dispute. Lorna's attorney cleared his throat. "We weren't aware of—" My attorney cut him off. "You weren't meant to be." Then came the third piece, a written timeline, dates, conversations, actions. My attorney spoke slowly now. "This is a documented pattern of attempted financial coercion, false medical representation, and premeditated asset seizure." The mediator looked up, eyes sharp now. "Is that accurate?" I spoke for the first time. "Yes." Lorna finally broke. She slammed her hand on the table. Not hard, just enough to be seen. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "He's twisting things. We were just talking." "Talking." The mediator turned to Tate. "Mr. Hollowell, is this your voice?" Tate didn't answer right away. He swallowed. His foot bounced under the table. Finally, he muttered, "Yes." That was it. That single word, yes. No justification. No spin. Just confirmation. The mediator leaned back and removed her glasses. She looked at Lorna, then at Tate. Then she said the sentence that ended everything. "This session is over." Lorna's attorney protested. "We can clarify." "No," the mediator said firmly. "This matter is closed, and I strongly suggest your client seek independent counsel regarding potential exposure." Exposure. That word landed like a gunshot. Lorna's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Tate stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly across the floor. He pointed at me. "You planned this." I met his eyes. Calm. Still. "No," I said. "You did." Security stepped closer. Not aggressively, just enough to signal that emotions were no longer welcome. Lorna started crying. Real crying. Not the performative kind. The kind that happens when the math collapses. She reached for Tate. He pulled away. They didn't look like a united front anymore. They looked like accomplices realizing the deal just fell apart. As they were escorted out, Tate turned back one last time, and here was the final visual shock. He looked small, not angry, not superior, just exposed, like a man who finally realized he wasn't as smart as he thought. I didn't feel joy in that moment. I felt relief, because the story was no longer in their hands. It was on record. After that, everything went quiet. No more letters. No more calls. No more threats wrapped in legal language. They disappeared from my life the same way they'd treated me for years. Once there was nothing left to take. And that was the nuclear part. Not screaming. Not lawsuits. Not public shaming. Just documentation. Timing. And the truth placed directly in front of witnesses who couldn't ignore it. Here's the quote I want burned into the end of this part. People who try to erase you always panic when you start writing things down. After that meeting, my phone went silent in a way that felt different from before. Not tense, not loaded, just empty. No messages from Lorna. No late-night texts from Tate pretending he wanted to talk things through. No attorneys fishing for leverage. No apologies wrapped in excuses. They didn't retreat because they felt guilty. They retreated because they were exposed. That's the part people misunderstand about moments like this. You don't win when the other side cries. You win when they stop reaching. I drove back to the ranch that evening with the windows down, cold air cutting across my face, the sky stretching out like it had somewhere better to be. I didn't turn on music. I didn't need noise anymore. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing for the next demand. I wasn't waiting for the next shoe to drop. I wasn't calculating how much of myself I needed to give away just to keep the peace. Peace was already there. It had just been waiting for me to stop negotiating with people who didn't deserve a vote. The weeks that followed were quiet in the best way. Not empty. Intentional. I fixed fence lines. I learned the land the way you learn a person you actually respect. Slowly. Paying attention. No assumptions. I made mistakes and corrected them without anyone keeping score. Sometimes, at night. I'd sit on the porch with a drink and think about how close I came to disappearing without ever being buried. Because that's what they were planning, not to kill me outright. Just to hollow me out, strip the authority, take the keys, control the narrative. Let me sit quietly in a corner while they decided what my life was worth. And the scariest part, if my brother hadn't warned me, it might have worked. That realization still hits hard, not because it hurts, because it reminds me how many people never get that warning. I heard through the grapevine that Lorna had to downsize hard. No more salon appointments every week. No more treat-yourself shopping sprees. Funny how budgeting becomes a skill when someone else isn't footing the bill. Tate's marriage took a hit. Turns out his wife didn't appreciate learning that her husband had been planning financial crimes against his own father. Who would have guessed? He tried to reach out once, a single email. Short. Careful. He wrote, "I didn't think it would go this far." I didn't respond, because here's the truth he still doesn't understand. It didn't go far. It stopped exactly where it should have. I didn't ruin his life. I just refused to let him ruin mine. And that distinction matters. Months passed. Seasons turned. I built a life that didn't require explanation. People out here didn't ask what I used to do or who I used to be married to. They cared whether you showed up, whether you meant what you said, whether you pulled your weight. Respect was simple, honest, non-negotiable. One afternoon, I stood on a hill at the edge of the property where my brother was buried. Just a marker. No drama. The land rolling out behind it like a promise he never got to cash in himself. I stood there longer than I meant to, and I said it out loud, because it mattered. You were right. Not about the money, about the people, about me. I spent most of my life confusing loyalty with obedience. I thought love meant enduring whatever was handed to you, as long as it came from family. I was wrong. Love doesn't plan your erasure. Family doesn't rehearse your death. And respect is not something you earn by shrinking. If you're listening to this, and you recognize yourself in any part of my story, if you're the quiet one, the reliable one, the one everyone leans on but no one looks at twice, hear this clearly. You are not selfish for setting boundaries. You are not cruel for walking away. And you are not obligated to keep funding people who are already counting the days until you're gone. Here's the line I live by now, the one that finally set me free. If someone only values you for what they get when you're gone, they never valued you while you were here.